Hello everyone, I'm Derek Tilley with the Aberdeen Plant Materials Center, and today we're going to talk about what the PMC can offer to the NRCS field offices. As you know, the NRCS got its beginnings back during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, and what we know as the Plant Materials Program started shortly thereafter. Different research farms and plant nurseries were commissioned to produce plants and seed for the conservation projects, and that has evolved into what we now call the Plant Materials Program. Today, there are 25 PMCs nationwide, each one serving a different geographic region, not necessarily within state boundaries, but to serve different ecoregions and ecosystems. And each center deals with the various conservation needs of that region. Aberdeen was begun back in 1939. We were one of the first plant materials centers organized. We currently operate on about 150 acres on 3 different farms to maintain isolation distance between our seed production fields. Our fields, 2 of them are owned, or 2 of our farms are owned by the South Bingham Soil Conservation District, and we lease that land from them. And another field is owned by the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. So as you can see here, we serve quite a large area, and keep in mind that black boundary is not a solid boundary. We serve pretty much anyone within the Great Basin or the Intermountain region, and our products are used well beyond that, even nationwide and worldwide in some cases. So you can see we serve officially 83 million acres and 13 different major land resource areas. So we've got quite a variety of resource concerns in that area. We look at rangeland and forest land restoration and other programs within the NRCS palette. We do a lot of work currently with wildlife habitat, whether that's for at-risk species like sage grouse, developing plants for them, or for monarch butterfly habitat, or just generally improving the habitat of our rangelands and forestlands. We also have historically done a lot of work in riparian and wetland areas, and we continue to do some of that, not nearly as much as we did in the last couple of decades, but we still have some projects going on and still have tools and information to provide for the field offices. A lot of our work goes into developing plant releases to solve resource problems, and then once we have releases, we produce seed and plants of those and provide them to either growers or directly to field offices or other conservation projects. And we also do a lot of technology transfer. We feel that if the information doesn't make its way into the field offices, then it wasn't worth doing. So everything we do, we try to either get into a tech note or a plant guide, or the ultimate goal is to make revisions to conservation practice standards. We'll talk a little bit about plant selection here. We frequently get requests from field offices, other land agencies, and private landowners. Everybody wants a new plant species for their project. They want it to be drought tolerant and easy to establish, and provide habitat for wildlife and produce nectar for pollinators and be good for cover crops. So we call this the quest for magic beans, trying to meet everyone's needs. So this Venn diagram shows a little bit about the process and the different aspects of plant selection that we're trying to balance. So here in the top, we have to meet the needs of the seed production industry. We have to make plants that can be grown on a mass scale, and seed can be produced on a mass scale. It's got to be cheap to produce. It's got to be cheap for the ultimate end user. And then here we need to meet the needs of the field offices and the conservation practices. Again, it's got to be cheap for the landowners. It's got to be um, you know, able to be mass produced, and it's got to meet the forage and habitat needs of the different projects or different conservation practices. Again, it's got to be broadly adaptable, so a release can't be just for one specific tiny area or ecoregion. It's got to be adapted throughout our whole service area to to meet the price demands of our clients. And then we also try to balance this out. The restorationists. This is BLM and Forest Service and Park Service, Nature Conservancy, and other groups that are concerned with restoring wildlife and plant habitat to its original form. This involves, matching genetics of the plants that used to be there with what's being put into the restoration projects. And we try to meet these needs, but our goals are just different enough that we can't do everything for all of these groups. So to meet this need, we might try to, for example, release plants that are broadly genetic based, so have a wide range of genetic diversity to meet to be adapted into a wider range than just a specific site. And here's the process. It starts up here with seed collection. The PMC staff will go out throughout the region and collect seed from native populations. Again, this covers the entire Intermountain West, so every summer we spend several weeks on the road collecting seed of whatever species we have decided is worth examining. And then we bring all that seed back to the Plant Materials Center, and we plant it out in what's called a common garden study, or an initial evaluation planting. So we just put these accessions in a replicated trial side by side, and then we evaluate them for whatever traits are valuable in meeting the resource concern. So that might be height, it might be forage production, it might be seed production, flower production, might be palatability, it could be soil health aspects. Whatever the resource concern, we try to measure traits that will reflect that. Then once we've selected one or more populations to go into a release, we give that a name and we put it on the commercial market. And then the PMC produces foundation seed of that release. That's the first generation or the first generations of that seed. This is the highest quality seed. And then we allocate that out to commercial producers through crop improvement agencies and foundation seed programs. And then ultimately it gets into the hands of the end user, which is in the case of NRCS, it'll be the landowner, but a lot of our seed gets used by the other land management agencies like BLM especially. And then it starts again with the next species on our list. So for example, Soda Springs World Buckwheat was released back in 2017. We did a study of 43 different populations of buckwheat, primarily looking for plants to go into that sage grouse habitat. We wanted something that produced a lot of flowers to attract insects. It had to be drought tolerant, it had to be easy to establish, and a good seed producer. And so out of those 43 accessions, we selected one population from just outside of Soda Springs in Idaho. And we released that, like I said, and called it Soda Springs World Buckwheat. Another kind of project we're working on is this idea of using early cereal or early successional natives for site capture. Most of our seed mixes in the past have come from these climax species, but we feel like we're missing species from these two groups here, these early successional species that come in and colonize a site after a disturbance, and they can help transition between disturbance and the climax community. These early successional species might be exceptionally good at fighting weeds. They might be good at converting soil resources and making it more adaptable to the more desirable species in the end. So as part of that, we released Amethyst germplasm hoary tansiaster in 2014. This is just a short-lived perennial, produces a lot of flowers, and pollinators love it. This was one of the main reasons we looked at this species was because there was a need for pollinators adapted to arid sites that flowered late in the season. So this was one of those species. It flowers from about August through, to the end of September and maybe even beyond that. And so it really meets this niche where there's not much else available for our pollinators at the end of the season. Evaluated 9 accessions on this trial and released this one from the St. Anthony Sand Dunes. Yeah, it's a great little plant, and it's available on the market right now. Curly Cap Gumweed is just currently under evaluation. We've got about 25 accessions from throughout the Great Basin that we're looking at. Despite its name, it has a lot of excellent traits. It's a native. It's one of those early successional species. It flowers late in the season, and it's a known food source for sage grouse chicks. It also attracts insects that the sage grouse are dependent upon. And so we expect to have a release of this plant within the next couple of years. Now we'll talk about some technology development. We don't just release the plants, but we also have to develop different technologies to help with either the establishment of those plants or the production of those plants. For example, when we released the hoary tansiaster, we didn't like the seed yields we were getting in our production fields. We were using this tool here called a flail vac, which has brushes inside this hood that sweep like this. It's like a street sweeper that goes through the plants. It's quite destructive. It shreds the flowers and the tops of the plants pretty good. And as you can see here, it puts a lot of vegetative material in with the seed, so it's difficult to clean out, pretty messy. And because it's so destructive, you only can pass through the plants one time. So it really limited our seed production. So the PMC crew developed this little modification where they hung drag chains off of the front of the flail vac and then elevated the flail vac brush completely out of the plant canopy. So only the chains drag through the plant, and the chains dislodge the seed, and the vacuum created by the flail vac brush sucks the seed up and collects just the seed. So here you can see the pile of seed that was just collected. This hasn't been cleaned at all. It's just straight out of the flail vac. And just from doing this modification, we increased our seed yields of this species by about 500%. So in the end, what this means is it's much easier to produce the seed, and the seed can be purchased much cheaper now on the market than it would have been. Another project we wrapped up recently was this one, looking at different methods to improve forb establishment in our arid lands. This trial specifically was looking at ways to capture and prolong soil moisture on these drier sites. You can see we had some different snow fences. Here they are again, and these create a dense snow drift in between the fences that allows that snow and moisture to stick around longer during the establishment period. We also had this fabric laid over our seeded rows. The fabric creates greenhouse conditions underneath it, so it's warm and damp and good for establishment in the early stages. We also looked at several different seed treatments, hydrophobic coatings and fungicides, different combinations of all of that. So a total of 64 treatments on 12 different species. And we got some good results off of this. They are currently in one paper has been published, and another one is underway. We also do a lot of work on enhancing germination of different seeds. A lot of our species in the Intermountain West have what's called a stratification requirement. They've evolved in a way that they don't germinate with just the first moisture that comes, that first fall after the seed has shattered. If the plants do that, they run a risk of germinating too early and then hitting another dry spell, which would cause them to die. So, for example, this curly cup gumweed seed does best if you stratify it in cool, moist conditions for about 90 days. Now, if you're producing plants in the greenhouse or want to do a seed viability test, that's quite a long time to wait for results. We got lucky and invented a new technique where we put seed in an oxygenated water bath, and this seed here is the same curly cup gumweed seed, and this has been in this oxygenated bath for about 5 days. Sometimes we see germination in as little as 24 hours. So this has really been a good invention, a good discovery, helps speed up the process for greenhouse production and some other trial work we do. We've recently started work on examining different plants for firewise plantings. For example, here we've got curly cup gumweed on the left and comparing that to cheatgrass on the right. These are both set over a 400 degrees Celsius burner, and we take measurements like percent moisture content and time to ignition and duration of flame and height of flame, and create models as to which species might be best, for example, in green strips in the Great Basin or for planting around houses that are in fire-prone areas. For example, this graph here shows percent moisture content throughout the summer of 6 different species. This one here is cheatgrass. You can see it starts out with good moisture, and then by July it's completely dry. This is why cheatgrass is so flammable. These 3 species here are our traditional fuel break species, not cheatgrass, but crested wheatgrass, Siberian wheatgrass, and Russian wild rye. The blue line is forage kochia, and the orange line is curly cup gumweed. So you can see gumweed starts with very high moisture content and drops down a little, but still stays well above crested wheatgrass and Siberian wheatgrass, and is just as moist as forage kochia and Russian wild rye throughout the summer. So from this study, we're able to recommend curly cup gumweed to enhance our green strips and provide some pollinator benefit. Again, the ultimate goal is to get our technologies and get our information out to the field offices. And so we respond to field office requests whenever they come in. For example, this study began back when the pollinator CRP program hit us. And we evaluated several different commercial wildflower mixes basically to find out which plants flowered and produced for us and at what time of the year. So you can see we have in this mixture several different species, and we've tracked when they flowered throughout the season. And then we watched these plants over several years and created pie charts like this to show percent cover and get an idea of which plants were really performing for us. And this study included about 60 different species, and from those we found a dozen or so that really were doing the bulk of the work. And so we were able to create recipes or suggestions like this one here. This is my mixture suggestion for 14 to 20 inch sites or minimally irrigated sites. And you can see it's got several native and introduced species. It's got flowers blooming of all different colors and throughout the growing season. So this has been very valuable. A lot of people are using this mix or variations of it. We're also looking at different seeding patterns to facilitate especially forb growth and establishment in pollinator plantings. So, for example, this block here represents our standard blend where all the seed is mixed together. And so you've got your flowers just kind of scattered out throughout the sea of grasses. And then we wanted to look at different planting patterns. So, for example, this block here are alternating drill swaths. So this light orange color would be a grass, 100% grass pass, and then this pass here would be just forbs, and so those alternate. You know, each one of these is as wide as a drill. This block here has alternating rows, so single row of grasses, single row of forbs, alternating. And this one has grasses going one way and forbs going another direction. This one, we establish the grass for a year and then use glyphosate to kill out little blocks and establish forb islands within the grass. So each of these might have their own special advantage. So this one, for example, it might be easier to control weeds if you can use broadleaf selective herbicides in the grass sections and grass selective herbicides in the forb sections. In the forb islands, you get really dense clusters of flowers, which might benefit pollinators flying above. Might be easier for them to see. So this is ongoing. We're still collecting data from it. But yeah, very useful information for the field offices. And then we've done a lot of work recently for the monarch butterflies. As you know, monarchs depend on milkweeds. And one thing we can do is help produce and manage milkweed sites to help our monarchs in Idaho and throughout the Great Basin. So we've been studying different ways to grow it in the greenhouse here. We've looked at different ways to produce plants based on root cuttings, and we've looked at seed collection methods. We've also produced a couple of different documents and tech notes on butterfly habitat creation and different plant lists that benefit the butterflies. And we've also been doing quite a bit with soil health over the last several years, looking at different species for cover cropping. This study here was of cool season cover crops. Looked at about 60 different varieties of 8 different species. And based on this study, we can now make recommendations not just of species, but of specific varieties of each of these species. For example, in the inset picture, this block here is our radishes, and you can see this species, or this variety here, didn't produce nearly as well, doesn't have the root production or the above ground production, so we would not recommend that in most cases. And in the end, all of this work goes to creating technical notes that the field office and others can get off of our website. All of these studies end up in some form for the field offices, and you can just see here a small sampling of what we have to offer. There's a couple for pollinator habitat, there's one for butterfly habitat, wetland plant species identification for delineators, seed drill calibration methods, and fuel breaks. Just 5 examples out of about 70 tech notes available on our website. And again, once we've released a species or released a plant selection, the PMC grows foundation seed of that. And this is just a short list of some of the plants we've been growing this last year. And again, this goes out to seed producers who then bulk it up, and that seed ends up on the commercial market. We also, from time to time, do projects with the National Park Service. where a lot of times they will need seed of specific genotypes from within the park boundaries, but they can't collect enough seed from within the park. So they'll make seed collections and then send it to us or other plant material centers for grow out. And you can see a couple of species we've grown over the years. Here we have showy goldeneye for Grand Teton National Park, sandbird bluegrass for Yellowstone National Park, and then a variety of different wetland sedges for Yosemite. And just to get an idea of the economic impact of our plant releases, we've got a couple years worth of data here. So these are NRCS program plantings in Idaho, Nevada, and Utah from 2017 and 2018, looking at average seeding rates and an average seed cost. And over those 2 years, we're looking at about $4 million worth of PMC releases being put on the ground. Similarly, this is a BLM seed buy breakout from 2013 to 2016. Some of their most requested species that come from Aberdeen Plant Materials Center, with a total value of those 3 years of $5.5 million. So on average, between BLM and NRCS, we're looking at about $3.3 million worth of Aberdeen Plant Materials releases being put on the ground every year. And finally, just to go over how we guide our operations, we put together a needs assessment every year where we ask for the different conservation needs from field offices throughout Idaho and Utah, either through our plant materials committee, or this can just be open discussion from anyone. We're always willing to take requests from people. And so each year we get a large list of requests, and we rank them, and then decide which ones we can do in the following year, or which ones might take several years to get through before we can make a usable product. And so I would just put out there that anytime field office folks or any of our partners or collaborators have a request for whether it's a plant release for a specific purpose, or a document of some kind, a plant guide or a technical note, just contact the Plant Materials Center and we'll get it on the list and we will address it as quickly as we can. And that wraps it up for this video. Thank you very much.